Hi, I'm Paul Burton, and today we'll talk about distressed municipalities in Pennsylvania. Our guest is Gary Lewis, who lives and works in one of those cities, Scranton. Gary is a private sector financial consultant that deals with distressed debt. Gary, welcome to our newsroom in New York.
Thank you for having me.
We have 27 communities in Pennsylvania labeled distressed, and they're in this workout program called Act 47. Some of them, including Scranton, have been in there as many as 21 years. That begs the question, is Act 47 working or not?
I personally don't believe Act 47 is working. If you look at the intent of Act 47, it really gives the distressed municipalities greater ability to exceed their statutory taxing limits. So cities get into Act 47 and under the guise of restructuring and reorganizing to have balanced budgets, and what happens is they become addicted to the additional revenue that's provided by Act 47. So there's no real incentive for the cities to properly restructure and emerge from Act 47.
Now, Harrisburg is the headline grabber in Pennsylvania. It's the state capital, and it has that dark, foreboding incinerator, bond financing overruns. But looking beyond Harrisburg, you have places like Scranton, Altoona, Farrell, Newcastle. They're in a lot different. Now, why are these communities struggling?
The communities are all struggling because of pension obligations, collective bargaining agreements, and these insurmountable debt loads that they've been allowed to take on. If you look at Scranton as an example, you have a city with about $110 to $120 million of city debt, and then somewhere in the neighborhood of $60 million of additional authority debt. By the time you add in all the interest and the unfunded pensions, the city's looking at close to a $400 or $450 million obligation in a city of 76,000. It's the same case in Harrisburg. By the time you add up all the incinerator debt and the city debt, you're looking at $350, $370 million. And no matter where you go, you see that all these problems stem from those three primary drivers: the unfunded pensions, because the state continues to give these distressed cities a little leeway, their collective bargaining agreements that provide high salaries, and the debt, which is simply insurmountable.
What solutions do you recommend for these cities to get out of the morass that they're in?
What Pennsylvania needs to do is they need to offer some way for these cities to restructure their long-term obligations, some form of restructuring that would be available under Chapter 9 bankruptcy. Pennsylvania seems very averse to allowing cities to file Chapter 9 bankruptcy. In fact, under Act 47, any city that chooses to pursue a Chapter 9 filing needs to be sanctioned by OECD, the Office of Economic and Community Development. So I think Pennsylvania needs to pursue some statewide method of allowing cities to restructure their collective bargaining agreements to reduce costs immediately, as well as some state's conduit to restructure their long-term debt and perhaps shift some of the burden onto the state.
Now, as soon as you said that, I see a little balloon go up in the words Central Falls. The Rhode Island community of only 19,000 filed bankruptcy in August of 2011. They were a basket case. 13 months later, Judge Frank Bailey in Providence granted the exit, and he said Central Falls could be the national model for how to deal with municipal bankruptcies and municipal distress. What does Pennsylvania need to do to model itself after Central Falls, and how Rhode Island works with distressed communities?
Absolutely. If you look at the Rhode Island approach to distressed communities is very different from what we have in Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, the governor has essentially taken a sink or swim attitude towards the municipalities. In Rhode Island, what you see is a very interested state-level government. In fact, the governor himself was a former mayor. He understands the challenges that are facing the individual cities. So I think if you were going to pull some lessons out of what's happening in Rhode Island and Central Falls specifically, I think it would really the lessons would really center on capping certain costs as a percentage of tax revenue. You see, when Central Falls tumbled into bankruptcy, they had fixed costs that were about 160 to 170% of their tax revenue. Now their fixed costs are about 90% of their tax revenue, which gives them a little bit of extra cash every year to perhaps restore some of the more drastic cuts that occurred when they fell into bankruptcy, as well as undertake some capital improvements, pay down some debt. In Pennsylvania, what we need is some sort of limits or some targets that the city should shoot for while they're restructuring. Maybe capping compensation and benefits at 60% of tax revenue, capping your debt service at 20% of tax revenue, instead of simply allowing them a multiple of their tax base.
Gary, thank you for joining us today.